Age usually brings wisdom, but in these cases, it led to something far darker. These are the oldest people ever sentenced to the ultimate punishment. And the reasons why will leave you questioning everything. Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was born in 1935 in Rex, Georgia, and raised in Fort Valley as the eldest of 3 children. From a young age, he was drawn to machines, quietly tinkering in workshops, developing a fascination that would later take a much darker turn. After graduating from Peach County High School in 1953, Moody served in various military roles, searching for structure and purpose. At one point, he even dreamed of becoming a neurosurgeon, but his academic efforts crumbled, and something inside him began to shift. In 1967, a psychiatric evaluation offered a chilling glimpse into his mind. It described aggressive tendencies, obsessive thoughts, and a deep, growing fear that he would one day harm society. That warning came true. In May 1972, Moody's wife, Hazel, opened a package originally intended for a car dealer who had repossessed Moody's vehicle. Inside was a homemade explosive. It exploded, injuring Hazel. Investigators traced the device back to Moody. He was convicted and served 3 years in federal prison. After his release, his obsession grew. He became consumed with overturning his conviction, creating a web of lies to shift the blame to a fictional man named Gene Wallace. To support this fabricated story, he manipulated a woman named Julie Lynn West, paying her monthly in exchange for rehearsing and repeating the false narrative. But the darkest chapter began in December 1989. On the 16th, Moody mailed an explosive that unalived U.S. Circuit Judge Robert S. Vance in his Alabama home and seriously injured the judge's wife, Helen. 2 days later, another one was delivered to the Georgia office of civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson, ending his life. He sent additional explosive devices to the NACP office in Jacksonville, Florida, and to the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, both intercepted before they could detonate. So, what was his motive? Moody's actions were driven by a desire for revenge against the legal system following his 1972 conviction. He wanted to reverse the decision, and to do so, he even mentioned the Ku Klux Klan to shift suspicion away from himself. Moody was arrested in July 1990, with his wife, Susan McBride, testifying against him after being granted immunity. In 1997, Alabama imposed capital punishment for the passing of Judge Vance. On April 19, 2018, at 8:42 p.m., Moody underwent his final penalty by chemical administration at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, making him the oldest U.S. inmate to receive such a sentence since 1976. Moody's last meal included 2 Philly cheesesteaks, a bag of chips, 2 Dr. Peppers, a bag of M&Ms, and an almond Hershey bar. He chose not to make a final statement and did not respond when asked if he had any last words. The next case involves a man whose tangled family history reveals secrets no one saw coming. John B. Nixon Sr. was born in 1928 in the small town of Midnight, Mississippi. He married Joanna Polk, raised 6 children, and lived what seemed like an ordinary life. But behind the surface was a troubled history, including a 1958 conviction in Texas involving a minor. Then came January 22, 1985, the night everything changed. Nixon, along with his sons John Jr. and Henry Leon Nixon, and an associate named Gilbert Jimenez, arrived at the Rankin County home of Virginia Tucker. The visit wasn't social. It was part of an unaliving-for-hire plot arranged by Virginia's ex-husband, Elster Joseph Ponthieu. As they stepped inside, Nixon reportedly said, "I brought y'all something." He raised his gun at Thomas Tucker, Virginia's new husband. The gun misfired. Thomas was injured but escaped to call for help. Inside the home, Virginia was trapped. Nixon turned the weapon on her and fired. This time, the gun didn't fail. The investigation moved quickly. Nixon and his accomplices were arrested, and at trial, Gilbert Jimenez testified in detail, outlining the entire plan. Nixon's defense claimed his legal team had been overworked and unprepared, but the court rejected those arguments. On March 26, 1986, John B. was found guilty. The jury pointed out 3 key reasons for their decision. It was all done for money, it was unusually cruel, and Nixon had a history of serious aggressive behavior. Because of this, he received a capital punishment. On December 14, 2005, as he lay strapped to the gurney, Nixon maintained his innocence, stating,
"I didn't take anyone's life. I'd rather face a penalty for something I didn't do than let my son take the blame."
His final meal included a T-bone steak, a baked potato, sweet tea, and ice cream. At 77, Nixon became the oldest person to have his capital penalty carried out in the United States since 1976. The next case will make you question everything you thought you knew about trust. James Barney Hubbard was born in 1930. In 1957, Hubbard was found responsible for the passing of David Dockery in Tuscaloosa County and was given a 50-year prison sentence after his claim of self-defense was rejected. After serving 19 years, he was released on parole in October 1976. Upon his release, he moved in with 62-year-old store owner Lillian Montgomery, who had befriended him and supported his parole. But on January 10, 1977, everything changed. But before we move on to the details, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. So what happened? He fired his weapon at Montgomery 3 times, once in the face, once in the head, and once in the shoulder, before taking her gold and diamond wristwatch, along with approximately $500 in cash and checks. He later told the police that Montgomery had accidentally caused her own fatal injuries while they were drinking whiskey together. However, the evidence told a different story. The multiple gunshot wounds and the theft pointed to a calculated, intentional act. Hubbard was later found guilty and was sentenced to a capital penalty in October 1977. For more than 27 years, the carrying out of his sentence was postponed due to many legal appeals. His defense team argued that his advanced age and declining health, he was suffering from dementia, hepatitis, and cancer, made it inhumane to enforce the penalty. One attorney remarked,
"He is a sick, frail man. He is harmless, and it makes no sense for the state of Alabama to carry out this penalty on him."
Despite these appeals, Hubbard's sentence was ultimately carried out on August 5, 2004, at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. At 74, he became the oldest person to have his capital penalty implemented in the United States since the penalty was reinstated in 1976. His final meal consisted of 2 eggs fried over medium, 4 slices of bacon, sliced tomatoes, fried green tomatoes, pineapple slices with mayonnaise, white bread, a banana, and a medium-sized bottle of V8 juice. Witnesses at the time included Hubbard's son and daughter, as well as 6 members of Lillian Montgomery's family. After a couple of minutes after the injections were inserted, he let out 2 slow yawns, then drifted off, mouth slightly open, appearing to fall asleep. His final moments were quiet. Hubbard's case raises important questions about justice and compassion. What are your thoughts on this case? Tell us in the comments below. Brandon Astor Jones was born in 1943 in Indiana. In June 1979, Jones, along with his co-defendant Van Roosevelt Solomon, planned an armed theft at a Tenneco convenience store in Atlanta, Georgia. A struggle broke out, which led to the tragic injury of Roger Tackett. The exact details of who caused the fatal injury were never fully clarified, as prosecutors were unable to determine who was responsible for the fatal shot. Jones denied being the one to harm Tackett and maintained he did not fire the fatal shot. Initially, Jones and Solomon were found guilty and sentenced to capital punishment in 1980. However, their convictions were overturned in 1989 due to issues during jury deliberations, specifically jurors improperly consulting a Bible. A retrial followed, leading to resentencing in 1997, where both men were again sentenced to capital punishment. Solomon's capital punishment was carried out in 1985, while Jones remained on the row for more than 3 decades. Brandon Astor Jones's time on the row came to an end on February 3, 2016, just 10 days before his 73rd birthday at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. The state chose lethal injection, and what was meant to be a controlled, clinical procedure turned into a prolonged and unsettling scene. Executioners struggled for 24 minutes to insert an IV into Jones's left arm, then spent another 8 minutes attempting the right. When both efforts failed, a doctor was called in to establish the line in a more invasive area, his groin, a process that added 13 more minutes. By the time the injection began, the room had been filled with tension and delays. Finally, at 12:46 a.m., Brandon Astor Jones took his last breath. But what happens when jealousy spirals out of control? The next case answers that in the most chilling way. Elias Hannahi was born in 1938 in Jerusalem. He came from an Assyrian Christian family. When he was 12, his life changed dramatically after his father was imprisoned by Israeli authorities following the establishment of Israel. His father's mental and physical decline led the family to move to Amman, Jordan. In Jordan, Elias served in the armed forces for 9 years before working as a machinist and part-time singer at a radio station. In the mid-1970s, Elias met Teresa Youssef, a woman living in the United States. They began a courtship through letters and photographs, which eventually led to marriage. The couple first moved to Chicago, Illinois, where Teresa adapted to Middle Eastern customs. Later, in 1986, they relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, and Teresa embraced a more American way of life by working at a gas station and building new social connections. This change caused tension in their marriage, as Elias did not agree with her new lifestyle. Their marriage was troubled by physical conflicts between them. Elias mentioned that Teresa often used force against him, and their children confirmed that there were times of mutual physical harm, including threats with dangerous items and physical fights. On July 28, 1990, Teresa filed for divorce and obtained a protective order, which required Elias to leave their home and not contact her or their 4 children. That same evening, Elias waited for Teresa's return. When she arrived, he blocked her car with his van. Approaching her vehicle, Elias used a screwdriver to inflict 28 deep wounds through the open window, all while their 10-year-old son, John, sat in the passenger seat. John tried to help, but he could not stop what was happening. Teresa survived for 28 days before passing away due to a severe brain injury. Elias was first charged with using a dangerous tool with the intent to cause serious harm. After Teresa passed away, the charge was raised to the highest level of offense. During the trial, evidence showed the harshness of the act, and the jury described it as especially shocking and cruel. This view outweighed factors such as Elias's claims of suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and his history of good behavior while in custody. As a result, he was given the ultimate penalty. Elias's appeals were denied. His children expressed forgiveness and asked for leniency, but Governor Mike Easley did not grant their request. At 2:12 a.m. on November 18, 2005, Elias Hannahi was put to the ultimate penalty by means of a medically administered procedure at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, at the age of 67. Next, we follow the life of Viva Leroy Nash, a man whose dangerous behavior spanned nearly 8 decades. Viva Leroy Nash was born in 1915 in Salt Lake City, Utah. He began engaging in wrongful behavior at a very young age. At 15, he was sent to prison for an armed theft. Over the years, his offenses became more serious, including car theft, and even an attempt to take the life of a police officer in Connecticut in 1947, for which he spent nearly 25 years in prison. In 1977, while serving a life sentence for being responsible for the loss of life of postal carrier David J. Woodhurst, Nash escaped from prison at the age of 66. Shortly afterward, he entered a coin shop in Phoenix, Arizona, and ended the life of an employee. This incident led to him receiving the most severe penalty available in 1983. Nash's trial ended in 1983 with a sentence reflecting the gravity of his actions. His defense argued that his advanced age and declining mental health made him less suited for further punishment. Despite these arguments, he remained under the strictest form of confinement. At 94, Nash was the oldest individual in that level of confinement. In his final 24 hours, he was largely withdrawn, and his interactions with staff were minimal. Before his life came to a close, he expressed his readiness for his final moments, saying,
"I'm at peace. I'm ready to be at home. Let's ride, Warden."
His request for a final meal was not granted due to changes in prison policy. Leroy Nash's life came to a close on February 12, 2010, at the Arizona State Prison in Florence, marking the end of nearly 80 years of wrongful behavior. Brad Keith Sigman was born in 1957. In April 2001, after his relationship with his girlfriend, Rebecca Barber, ended, he was involved in an aggressive act that led to the passing of her parents, David and Gladys Lark, who were 62 and 59 years old. On April 27, 2001, Sigman entered the Larks' home in Greenville, South Carolina, and used a baseball bat to cause severe harm to them. His history included previous incidents related to breaking into properties and harming others. Following this event, he was formally charged with 2 counts related to unlawful loss of life and 1 count of breaking and entering. During his trial in July 2002, prosecutors described the situation as extremely severe and pushed for the highest legal penalty. The jury found Sigman responsible and recommended this penalty, emphasizing that the act was committed during a break-in and that the victims had endured significant suffering. In 2005, the South Carolina Supreme Court upheld the decision. After more than 2 decades under legal confinement, Sigman faced the final ruling on March 7, 2025, at the age of 67. Authorities carried out the sentence using a method involving trained personnel, as concerns had been raised about the potential distress caused by other available options. For his final meal, Sigman chose 4 pieces of fried chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Before the sentence was carried out, he made a statement opposing such penalties, citing his Christian beliefs. Family members of those affected, officials, and reporters were present. Now, let's examine the case of Carl Wayne Buntion, whose early life of hardship led him to a path that ultimately ruined his life. Carl Wayne Buntion was born in 1944 in Harris County, Texas. His early years were filled with hardship, as he grew up in a home where mistreatment was common. His father took someone's life in front of one of his sons and frequently hurt his family. Carl's mother suffered severe injuries, including losing her teeth due to physical mistreatment. Carl himself endured broken bones from this environment and later stated that these experiences left him with long-term emotional distress. Bunch's troubles with the law started in 1961 when he was convicted of stealing. Over time, he faced multiple legal issues, including breaking into properties, damaging property, and possession of illegal substances. One of the most serious charges against him involved harming a child, for which he was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. However, he was released after serving just over a year. A major turning point in his life came in 1971 when his identical twin brother, Kenneth, lost his life in a confrontation with law enforcement. This deeply affected Carl, and he reportedly swore that he would rather face an aggressive encounter with police than return to prison. On June 27, 1990, Bunchen was riding in a car that was pulled over by Houston police officer James Irby, who was 37 years old. While Officer Irby was speaking with the driver, Bunchen got out of the vehicle and fired a shot at Irby's head. As the officer fell, Bunchen fired 2 more shots at his back. Afterward, he tried to forcefully take another person's car, fired at another officer, and aimed his weapon at a bystander before being taken into custody inside a nearby building. In 1991, Bunchen went to trial and was found guilty of a serious charge that resulted in a life sentence. His conviction was overturned in 2009, but after a new trial in 2012, he was found guilty again and given the same sentence. He spent years appealing his case, but in October 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review it, confirming the decision. On April 21, 2022, at 6:26 p.m., Bunchen, at the age of 78, faced the final outcome of his sentence at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, making him the oldest person in Texas to receive this sentence under modern laws. Before this took place, Buntion spoke directly to Officer Irby's family and his own loved ones. He said,
"I wanted the Irby family to know one thing. I do have remorse for what I did. I pray to God that they get the closure for me taking their father and Ms. Irby's husband. To all of my friends that stuck with me through all of these years, I am not going to say goodbye, just saying so long. I am ready to go to heaven, Warden."
There is no widely available information about whether Buntion requested a specific meal beforehand. In Texas, individuals in his situation can request a final meal within a $20 limit, though some choose to decline the option. James Mancos Jim Stevens was 76 years old and well known around Mancos, Colorado, a familiar face in a quiet town where everyone knew each other's names. But on the night of October 9th, 1939, a routine evening took a turn no one saw coming. After spending time at the Columbine Tavern, Stevens got into a heated argument with another man, Frank Kratz. The exchange grew tense, loud enough to draw the attention of Town Marshal Lynn Dean, who stepped in to calm the situation. Wanting to prevent any further trouble, Dean escorted Stevens away from the scene. But the peace didn't last. Not long after, Stevens returned, still angry, and picked up the argument right where it had left off. Marshal Dean intervened again, this time escorting him toward the jail. But as they neared the building, the situation spiraled. A struggle broke out, and in the chaos, Stevens pulled out a firearm and fired at the marshal. Witnesses later testified that Stevens had been drinking heavily, and that the situation escalated in seconds. The calm, elderly man the town thought they knew was now at the center of a deadly confrontation. In court, the jury found him guilty. He received the harshest sentence available, and on March 24, 1941, the Colorado Supreme Court upheld the conviction. On June 20, 1941, at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Cannon City, Stevens faced the final stage of his sentence in the gas chamber, making him the oldest person in Colorado to undergo this form of legal punishment at the time. Reports say he spent his final days speaking with relatives and Father Albert, the prison chaplain. His last words were not officially recorded, and he was laid to rest in Lakeside Cemetery without a headstone. John Wayne Gasey was born in 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in a working-class family, but his childhood was far from easy. His father struggled with heavy drinking and often treated him harshly, both physically and emotionally. This difficult upbringing shaped his behavior and contributed to the troubling path he later followed. As an adult, Gasey presented himself as a well-respected member of the community. He worked as a contractor, managed several KFC restaurants, and was even involved in local politics. He was married twice and had 2 children, which helped him maintain the appearance of an ordinary, responsible citizen. On top of that, he entertained children by dressing up as a clown for charity events and parties, earning the nickname Pogo the Clown. Behind this friendly public image, however, Gasey was leading a much darker life. He used his charm and position in the community to lure young men, often promising them job opportunities or a good time. One of his favorite tricks was a so-called magic act with handcuffs, which he used to put his targets in a vulnerable position. Once they were under his control, he restrained them and treated them with extreme cruelty. Inside his home, Gasey carried out his actions with cold calculation. He subjected his victims to mistreatment and took advantage of them in horrifying ways. To prevent them from escaping, he used restraints and overpowered them. In the end, he made sure they wouldn't be able to leave his house alive. Many of the bodies were hidden in a crawl space beneath his home, while others were discarded in a nearby river. His need for control and his ability to hide his actions allowed him to continue undetected for several years. The truth only came to light when authorities started investigating the disappearance of a local teenager. As they gathered evidence, everything pointed back to Gasey's property. When law enforcement conducted a thorough search, they uncovered undeniable proof of what had been happening inside his home. With this discovery, his carefully built double life crumbled, and the legal process against him began. During his trial, Gasey tried to claim that he wasn't fully aware of what he was doing and attempted to use an insanity defense. However, the jury carefully reviewed the overwhelming evidence against him and rejected this claim. He was found responsible for everything he had done. Gasey was given the most severe legal penalty, and after spending 14 years in confinement, his sentence was carried out in 1994. For his final meal, he requested a bucket of KFC chicken, French fries, 12 fried shrimp, a pound of strawberries, and a Diet Coke. His last words reportedly were,
"Kiss my."
Even in his final moments, he showed no remorse, leaving behind a legacy of terror that continues to disturb those who learn about his case.